Okay, looks like everyone's here, and as it's 6:30, I'll start the meeting. I have to start off with the virtual meeting statement. I am Councillor Frankham, the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, and I would like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which is being held virtually in accordance with the Council rules for virtual meetings, which reflects recently published government guidance regulations. The meeting is being streamed on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting has finished. Councillors who sit on the committee are identified by name on screen. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are to regard as being present in a meeting of the council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the members' code of conduct and not allow members of households to distract them during the course of the meeting. Can members ensure that their mobiles are switched off and are on silent? Members of the committee, will you turn your video links during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as their chair? Members are reminded that if they switch off their video links or move away from the camera, they are treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate they wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when, as chair, I invite them to do so. The officers' present will only start their video link on during the items which are presented or where they wish to be invited to speak by the chair. As chair, I can confirm the name of any visiting speakers at the appropriate time in the agenda who will address the committee by audio link. Councillors should also declare leaving the meeting and switching off the video link if they have disclosable pecuniary interest or other person interested in an item on the agenda. The council should switch off the video and when called for the next item, switch to the video link and when called for the next item. Can I remind councillors that if the connection is lost, that they should immediately advise the Democratic Support Officer and use the meeting link to access the meeting again. Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to put my phone on silent. Okay. Sorry, so I'll start the meeting. Right. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I've not had any apologies. I've just had a substitution. Nick Robinson's replacing Councillor Cacon. Are there any declarations of interest? No. There's no urgent items. Okay, next to the minutes of the meeting, and this is from the supplemental paper that was sent out because there were some corrections and things added. Are they agreed? Okay. Next is whoops. Just trying to find next is the BVA presentation, and Carol Bode there. Hello, Carol. You just turn your mic off there.
Yep.
Like, introduce yourself and a bit about BVA and how they coped under the COVID.
Right, okie doke. Well, hello everybody. My name's Carol Bode and I'm the chair of Basingstoke Voluntary Action, chair of trustees, and have been now for, I think, coming up for 3 years as such. So thank you for giving me the opportunity of actually coming and talking to you tonight. As you know, BVA has been working really closely with the council all through COVID as your lead partner. And from our point of view, actually, it's been a really good experience to have, really. So I think since March, shall I just talk about COVID first and the work we've been doing this year might be best. But since March, we've worked with yourselves to basically jointly set up and then coordinate all of the community hubs, which basically, as you know, we had over 30 community hubs set up. So there's quite a lot of coordination work to be done in terms of getting things to them and actually supporting them. Until August, the council were actually running the absolute helpline and referral programme, and then that was being passed through to ourselves. But then we've taken that on from you since August, and all seems to be working well. And the reason we've been able to do that is we got a grant from the lottery through to December to actually support some of our COVID work as such. And I think I don't know how many of you have actually seen our impact report or saw our digital AGM, but there's quite a lot in a nifty little document that looks like that. It's all about the COVID impact report, and actually that will say exactly what together we actually managed to do in terms of various projects, in terms of various community hubs and supporting members and what have you. If I can mention the communication that has been between the two parties, in one way, it's been a great opportunity, I think, to actually strengthen the communication between the council and between BVA. Now, in particular, I suppose for COVID, we did start off from March, I think it was, until May. And I think Tony and Mary were on daily calls with your officers as such. In which case just coordinating it, and they got into that habit. That then reduced, I think, to 3 times a week and then a week. But there's always been ongoing communication, which has been really, really helpful. And it's been helpful because it's been able to resolve issues quickly and promptly and try and cut through some of the bureaucracy that may have impacted on us, maybe in the past as such. So from a BVA perspective, it was good. It was good to actually feel that we were being informed of latest developments of what was happening. I think when things like the £200,000 grant was then made available, which you passed to us to distribute, we could actually do that quite seamlessly and actually get that money out to where it was wanted. And so basically that was one of the big pluses of it. I think probably one of the other things my team would say was it strengthened, if you like, the communication and the links with various departments in the council, right through from Ian Bowl, who was actually on many of the calls, through to your communities team, the economy and culture team as such, with a press office. And I think when needed, we were actually able to actually jointly actually reply to any questions that were coming in or comment on articles that were going out, etc. Now, obviously, we're having calls again now. We've moved into the next stage. I think, I'm not sure, I haven't caught up with Tony. I know they started as probably being more frequent, but I think we're probably having 2 or 3 calls a week at the moment, just as actually this second wave or as this lockdown is actually taking effect. But from what I understand and what I hear, that is going well. So that things are up and running. Some of the community hubs have stood up again. So they're being supported. So basically, I think in terms of the connection between the council, all of our community and voluntary sector organisations, with ourselves, if you like, in the middle as the conduit, as awful as this year has been, it's really strengthened that, I believe, for Basingstoke and Dean. So in terms of that communication flow between a lot of what we would class as our members and ourselves has helped. And together, I think we've been seen as a good force as such. I think there's one person that obviously my team really do actually want to thank as such, and that's Daniel Garnier, the economy and culture manager, because throughout this he has worked absolutely relentlessly, and he's been out and he's supported some of the things we've been doing and what have you, and there's been that really constant flow of communication between our two organisations. So those of you that know BVA from the past, I mean, we haven't always enjoyed such a strong relationship, and I think if you're going to look at some of the positive things that may have come out, as I say, of this awful year, I think the way we've all rallied together and pulled together has really worked. and we actually enjoy and have really enjoyed sort of having such a strong relationship with the council that maybe we weren't enjoying as much as we were previously. So, you know, looking on the positive side, if anyone wants to see anything positive coming out, that's certainly from our perspective been good. So I don't know, Councillor Frankham, if that's covered what you were expecting, but that's our experience through COVID anyway. So I'm quite happy to take some questions.
Has anyone got questions? Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a matter of interest. In the last 6 months, how much of your activity has been focused on Basingstoke town as opposed to some of the organisations in the rural areas?
I think in terms of, to be quite honest, the community hubs, as you know, were set up across the whole of the Basingstoke and Deane area. And so they have been supported as much as Basingstoke town. I know certainly, you know, if you go out to Oakley, if you go out to Tadley, I don't know if that's where you're referring to in terms of rural areas. There's been some really quite active work going on. I think, to be quite honest, we've responded to our members' needs. And if those members have been from the town or whether they've been rural, it really hasn't made much difference. We've actually helped and supported them in however they wanted to be supported. I think a lot of it has been about communication and getting the communication out there in terms of, you know, what grants are available, what money is available, etc., etc. You know, just trying to get that flow going. So I haven't got a breakdown of the difference, but I would be surprised if anybody from our rural areas was actually asking for assistance or help. They would have been dealt with in the same way as some of the town areas.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions? Councillor Taylor, and then I've got Councillor Corr. So Councillor Taylor goes first.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carol, and you know, thank you and all your team and all the community hubs for the work that's taken place during this difficult time. We're all very, very grateful for it, and so I'm sure all the residents. I mean, it's really pleasing to see that one of the most important things that you think that's positive that's come from this is increased communication, and it particularly finding out, you know, different departments of the council and what different departments can do and how they can help. In terms of the things that, you know, if we were starting this again from scratch, what would we do what could we do differently, or what would, you know, be done differently that might make things even better, you know, even quicker or faster? You know, did the community hubs, for example, get everything they need, or could we have done something? Would more money have helped, or more manpower? That's that sort of thing. How might we have done even more?
Yeah, I actually think one of the lessons, and I'm sort of standing back from it because I wasn't obviously involved in the day-to-day stuff that was going on. But I think just knowing more about what each department was doing and the interaction between them actually was really helpful. I think in this community voluntary sector space that we live in, there can be an awful lot of duplication of effort, and there can be an awful lot of things popping up. So I think irrespective of COVID, one of the big things on our focus is to try and reduce the duplication and try and actually funnel, if you like, activity where it's needed, because the funds are precious. And yet I think whether it's with the council or whether it's with some of the local organisations, people aren't always aware of what is already there, and they will actually start to set things up. So and I know why that is, because people get very passionate about things. But I think there's more of a coordination role that we could do. And I think part of it, in terms of looking at the council and BVA, I mean, the council has its own community development team and what have you, and maybe that's brought us slightly closer together, because in the past there have always been some murky lines between what's in the council's remit and what's in our remit. And I think just that clarification helps. Where is the resource? What are the expectations of each other? In terms of the money, I mean, we were able, obviously, to distribute the money. I mean, it wasn't to anybody that asked. There were some set criteria, and we were really specific about that, because obviously a lot of the food that's gone out, and initially it was for people who were obviously suffering because they'd signed on for universal credit and maybe but at the end of the day, we really want to make sure it's the right people and the people in most need who are getting that money. So I think, again, there's some probably lessons about that. And some of our community hubs, we do know, are better at actually assessing that need or not. The one question that we're still trying to get underneath is why some community hubs, there's a handful of them, seem to be extremely busy, and yet an awful lot of others are okay. And I think there's a lot of learning that we can actually do about that. So again, it's communication. It's quite interesting because and I haven't got the update on this, but the money that came through very late from the government, I'm just giving you this as an example, on free school meals for over half term, came through very late. And I know it came through from Hampshire to yourselves to us. We've struggled to actually give that money out because people are saying they don't need it. So there's a question here in terms of actually where the funding's needed. So, you know, lessons to be learned. Is there anything we could have done differently? I think the speed at which it all got up and running actually was really good. Yes, had we been in a better place in terms of that joined up thinking, communication, what have you, up front, we might have got a 2 or 3 week lead on it. But I think the speed that it got up and running was actually served as well.
Councillor Taylor.
Can I just ask a supplemental on that, please, Chair? Thank you. I mean, one of the things when I was talking to a fellow councillor who's very heavily involved with one of their community hubs was the feedback that they'd had from their community hub that they had a sort of short hiatus period of not knowing what they could do, what they should be doing, or how to go about things. And I wondered whether some sort of manual or guide would be, you know, a worthwhile product from this. So in the event of, you know, genuine emergencies, I mean, it might be a pandemic, it could be, you know, something completely different, that they actually have something that says this is where you can go to, this is the contacts, this is how you know, kickstart things in, so that they've got something for the future to sort of guide them. Is that something that's worth us thinking about?
Yeah, I think everything that's obviously gone on, it was new for us all, so everything has been documented. But I'll certainly raise that with Tony and make sure, because it's certainly, we've got to harness the learning, and some of the learning is that setting up of the procedures and the manuals. I mean, there were, despite the fact it was sort of, if you like, all hands to the pump, we're really keen that the governance is right around it as well, because obviously you're dealing with money and you are dealing with individuals. So we did have to put quite a lot of information out and help to people up front. But again, that then links back to BVA's, one of BVA's core activities, which is actually to support our local community and voluntary organisations with that sort of resources and with that sort of information. So I will make sure that our learning from COVID is in with them. But yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor Taylor. That's right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, I was on mute. Councillor McCormack, you had some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just got one, actually. Can I just reiterate the thanks on behalf of all of us to you, Carol, and your team for the tremendous job that you've done these past 9 months under the most trying of circumstances. When this year started, none of us would have had any idea as to how we would be finishing it. And we did have to learn things, think on our feet and adapt very quickly. going into the new year, I expect your activities will be changing again. How do you envisage things panning out for you and community outreach activities in the new year? We're not quite out of the woods yet. There's, you know, a lot of good news on vaccines, but we've got to get them rolled out, and it could be several months yet. So we're not quite out of the woods yet. So, yeah, my question is, you know, how do you see things evolving in the new year?
Well, certainly, I think one of the things we've started to look at, and I think this will apply to many charities and voluntary organisations, is life after this year, in terms of actually where does the future lie, and given a whole host of stuff, despite all of the current effort that the team are putting in, we have started to look at going back to what are our core activities. So I think we probably see it in 3 areas to focus on, and it does sort of link to your question. So one is very much carrying on connecting the VCS sector. The bit I mentioned before, it's very much, we know a lot more now about, I mean, I think we've done, I think Tony was telling me the other day, we've done part of that, if you like, an audit in terms of how many organisations we've got. And across Basingstoke and Deane, there are near on 800 little organisations and voluntary organisations. So we very much believe that we've got to look at how do we harness the potential of those 800 and support them more, so that, I say, we do reduce duplication, but actually get more, if you like, bang for your bucks, basically, in terms of the value for Basingstoke and Deane residents. And some of that is about knowing more, but some of that is about sort of working on that, what we call a culture of connectivity. I think the area that we want to focus on more is how do we readily all share and identify and meet the needs of our residents. There are lots of information flows, there's lots of intelligence gathering that goes on, but how can we better, if you like, capture that consistently, so that, you know, together we can actually plan, rather than lots of people actually going out. So I'm sure there's a lot of wealth of information, lots of intelligence. We want to make sure that we know where it is, and we've got the flows going in terms of that communication. So it's going to be a focus on that, and that's part of, if you like, being able to match the need to what we know is available. So demand and need. The other bit that I suppose we've learned from this year is just how important it is to support all of those organisations in terms of how well they're governed and how effective they are. We all know that, you know, sometimes everything fails because actually the governance is wrong, and a lot of the questions in the early days, going back to Councillor Taylor's, were a question about how do you set up, how do you actually do the money, how do we govern this when people weren't used to it. So I think life after COVID, there will be more, but it'll actually be building on what we've done, but in BVA's core areas, which are that, you know, supporting members, connecting members, identifying residents' needs, and then making sure that actually it's governed well. I mean, the other top thing for BVA, like many charities, is obviously to look at actually how to remain sustainable into the future. Because obviously everybody knows that wherever you get grants and whatever for, they're under pressure. So we are currently looking at the services that we currently offer, and what we might need to do more of in the future as well. We've learned one of the things I haven't actually mentioned yet is our management of the orchard, in terms of the orchard and that space. So that's actually been quite a learning thing as well, in terms of we've had a number of our smaller organisations vacate, but we've also had other people move in. So we're very much looking at how do we best use the office space, the meeting spaces, what do we offer, and there's lots of quite exciting stuff that's going on to try and keep the orchard as viable into the future. So yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question, Councillor McCormack, but that's probably our... Yeah,
I think that's a very fulsome answer. Thank you very much.
And just before I bring George in, it was slightly mentioned there, I'm concerned about the Data Protection Act and how that hampered and hinders sometimes getting the information. Are there any lessons we can learn around that? Because it was difficult to sometimes identify the people that need, because there are lists, obviously, like we know who's got benefits, but you can't give that information because it's of data protection. Is there anything you'd like to comment around that?
No, I mean, I haven't got any answers of that, but that's exactly that. It's in terms of, you probably all remember, going right back to the beginning when we were together trying to get the volunteering space up and running within Basingstoke and Dean, and NHS volunteering came along, the national bit, and then we went through those weeks and months, and then, well, we're not quite sure who they're supporting versus we're supporting. So are people double getting or not, or where are the gaps? I think we've got to somehow find some pragmatic ways round the data protection whilst protecting data, but together actually identifying where that particular need is. I mean, there is a question mark, and not quite right. I mean, we have a couple of our community hubs who seem to be providing food to so many people when a lot of the others aren't, and part of that, it could be, well, it probably is need that's needed, but whether it's going to the right places or not, I think there is a bit more work we need to do in terms of how do we get the high level, if you like, information and stats so that we focus things appropriately. But data protection, is we have to obviously all protect that.
Okay, Councillor George, would you like to ask your questions?
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carol, for your team. I can only reiterate how well the whole thing was coordinated, particularly at the beginning, and how quickly it got up on the ground. Actually, it was remarkable. I think one thing that I'm seeing is very much we've had some experience in Whitchurch at the writing of the emergency response plans, and they are very, very much, very much the local efforts are very much subsidiary to the central efforts. But what I've seen, I think, in this emergency, which is basically unprecedented, frankly, in its scale and coverage and everything else, is how quickly things were really, how quickly community groups got together to respond to this. It was remarkably quick, and how particularly, the use of the social media and what have you enabled that. And I really think what you and the community groups have done is really needs to be reflected in some of the emergency plans going forward, because it's a remarkable example of how well communities can respond to these things with coordination from central, but with the resources and what have you, and the effort coming locally. And I think that's been unprecedented on this one. I'd like to congratulate that on, but also recognise, I think it's with the advent, particularly social media, enables communications to get out very quickly, things to all be organised very quickly. Music, and really the central organisations should really learn from that and benefit from these local communities, groups to get together, and their ability to be able to respond to these things, because the emergency plans at the moment are very, very, very much, well, sit back, help where required, but get told what to do by a central organisation. I really think we need to rethink that, frankly, and I'd be interested in your role in that.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there, actually, and in one way, whether it's community groups, whether it's the local organisations, or whether it's volunteers. I mean, one of the pieces of work that through our volunteer bureau, I know that we want to focus on is actually how do we build on this fantastic effort that so many local residents have actually made, and the number of people who have said they want to help out. How do we recognise what volunteering and what help can be into the future, because it is very different these days in terms of where it's been in the past. And I think there's still quite a traditional look that to volunteer to do anything you need to give a few hours here and a few hours there, or a bit of money and what have you, and it's not that at all. So I think there's a way that we can very much build on that bottom up, if you like, supported by the group, because that's the way it works. And it works with individuals as volunteers, and it works with local groups as well. So part of that comes back to that connected society, I think, or connected sectors, not society, sector. But part of it too is about actually recognising those volunteers and getting them to learn what it is that they've been able to actually deliver and actually do. I mean, there's many. Funny enough, trying to match volunteers to vacancies is more difficult than one would seem. This has actually obviously got a number of people enthused because there was an actual urgent need. Somehow we've got to harness that and actually work going forward to say there are those opportunities still around.
Okay, thanks, George. Got a further question?
No, thank you, Chair. I think that was a very good response. Thank you, Carol, and good luck doing that in the future.
Thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Okay. During the beginning, one of the issues that was raised to me why some areas were a bit slow to start was we were waiting for the county to set up a generic phone line. So that it was a one phone number to call if you needed any help. Did that impact you at all? Or?
Which line, Councillor Frankham? I'm not sure.
At the beginning, Hampshire County Council set up a generic phone number that anybody needed anything, they phoned that one number, and they were a bit slow to release it and start the number. Did that have any impact on you?
I personally can't say, but I mean, I personally can't say. I'd have to get back to you on that. There are, because obviously we're very BVA. We're obviously our prime focus is on Basingstoke and Deane, but we are part of the Hampshire CVS network through the funding that Hampshire Council at the moment actually give to the CVSs, and that is currently hosted by Communities First Communities First Wessex. So they then give work to us. That is quite a difficult relationship to actually negotiate and one to keep going because of exactly what you said. All of a sudden this helpline will pop up and it unbeknown to us. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes trying to get that lack of confusion, because communication, if anything, has been the key through these last few months. People have needed to know where to go, where they're going to get a response, and I know that's happened, and that's happened better at a local level, I think, than at a Hampshire-wide level. So it's one of the things that behind the scenes we have to constantly raise and challenge and what have you. But in answer to your question, I don't know if it causes any specific issues up front. It would have caused some confusion and some work behind the scenes to try and sort out who was taking what. But I think we've all said, I think probably, I don't know, everyone's probably seen local is best. You know, if it's local, if you know where to go, if you've got local support, it tends to, well, it certainly proved to work for us.
It was meant to be one number so that if you phoned, they didn't route you to the right person, so that you didn't have lots of numbers depending where you are.
Yeah.
And it did cause some issues. So me and my mum were working here, doing quite a lot of signposting with people at the beginning. Because obviously I'm asthmatic, my mum's in retirement age, so we had to self-isolate. So all we could do was support people and point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
So and that was one of the things that hampered us helping people, because we had to guess the best place to put, whereas that filtered it and sent you to the right place.
And I think without getting into the debate about Hampshire versus Basingstoke and Deane, I mean, there you know, even within this sector, there are things that we're having to manage, so that but you know, we're very much focused on what's in the best interest of Basingstoke and Deane, whilst managing the Hampshire politics with our other CVSs and what they decide to actually set up.
Okay.
I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
Yeah. On the ground, most of what I saw worked really, really well. I would question, like you said yourself, was it necessarily the right person who got the food all the time? Because some didn't seem to just include everyone rather than really target. But I'd rather everyone get it and miss someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that was probably the right approach this time anyway. Yeah. But as the future, we've only got finite resources. It's something we're going to have to get more targeted at.
Yeah.
Well, the other question I got is, so it's a £200,000 spent. How did you check that we're getting value for money for that money?
I'd have to come back to you on that, but I think in terms of everyone, those that applied for it, so there had to be an application first in terms to get the grant, and with that there would have been certain criteria. I'm assuming that after that, obviously there is some checking then. So certainly the community hubs, some are better than others, granted, because are better at giving us the information back. So I think if you were to ask Mary or anybody in terms of what that information coming back, there are some community hubs that would actually have been able to show how many people were receiving something, how many visits they did and whatever. That is something that for the future, and I really bang on about this in terms of value for money, because it's not about, you know, how many, excuse my phrase, bums on seats and how many deliveries do you make. It's more about what has been the added value to those local residents. And I think there's a lot more work that together we can do in that in terms of the value impact. Part of our report that we put out, the COVID impact report, was more to start going into those areas to say this is where we've seen the value, this is where we think it's been really beneficial. It's only a start, but it's more than, you know, where did it go? It's more, there's a lot of other social factors that we need to build in, but there's a lot of more work to do. And again, you know, this has been a huge learning year as well in terms of that.
There's no one's indicated yet. The last question is quite a minor one. I had one person who was getting food parcels and they were getting things they were allergic to, had allergies to, but
Yeah.
I don't know which source they got that from. What was the policy? Do you know what
I
policy?
wouldn't have a clue, because I've heard of people that were still shielding, who were still getting the NHS volunteers food package when they didn't need it. So I don't know, but it's one of those things that again, I can take that back into BVA and just say, you know, from the community, it's part of the advice, isn't it, to community hubs, really. I personally don't know what the checking procedure was between, you know, community hubs giving out food and people's tolerances and what have you, but it's a point that's worth noting.
I'd be interested. I'm someone that's got quite a few food allergies.
Okay.
So like,
I
can't have fish.
I suppose it depends on whether anyone knew they had the food allergies as well. So
yeah. It was just interesting because I don't think she fed back very well that she had the allergies.
No.
Because when we told the organisation, she started to get more appropriate parcels.
Yeah.
So I just wondered what was happening on that. Is there any other questions before? Okay. Nobody else got any more questions. So as chair, I'd like to thank you for coming tonight. Also, all the work that the BVA have done over the COVID. I've always known how good the organisation is because I did give my mayor's award to BVA for business. Maybe I should have declared that. Yeah. So well done on all the work, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you everybody. Yeah, it's been enjoyable. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Next we've got the task finished on the 106. So if Councillor Miller would like to present that paper.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's not that paper per se. Just give you a bit of background for any councillors who are a bit unsure of what we had going in the task and finish group, but examining the S106 process. It was called for by Scrutiny about 18 months ago. And what we were trying to do was establish the process for S106, because for a lot of councillors, including myself, a bit of a black art, getting contributions from developers and then channeling those contributions into the various aspects of the community, for infrastructure, for everything that in a lot of ways at all spectrums of the communities would benefit our residents. Now, we met on 2 occasions, and then we were requesting from officers some information where we could really get our teeth into, was a breakdown by wards, because that's how it's developed, is by wards, and also working with parishes, those wards that do have parishes, and make sure that there's an understanding for members and officers, so we've got a common understanding of how the process of S106 works. Obviously, it comes through the planning system, and the criteria for what S106 is applied to has changed in the time that I've been a councillor, nearly 13 years. It's changed 3 times. So the criteria, it's been a moving feast. We don't dictate the criteria, it's given to us. So the best way to describe it, I've got Sadie to push out 2 documents for our delectation for this evening. And one is a flow chart, which has been picked over by the officers. It's been discussed initially with the task and finish group. And the other was produced by finance. And that is a spreadsheet. I hope you all had a chance to look at it. Spreadsheets are dreadful things at the best of times, but just to bring your attention to right at the top of the spreadsheet, it itemizes, and this is finance's words, not mine, the kind of balance, and you'll see all the big numbers go below it. One is the balance reconciled, that they've reconciled these numbers, that represents the amount that's been paid to the council by developers, and it's broken down by ward. The second column, this is in column D, the balance is fully reconciled on the total of Section 106 contributions received, but not yet spent. So there's a difference there, a delta. Then the last column, column E, is the amount based on signed agreements that's due for payment to the council. Now, there's no way we can go through that spreadsheet tonight. It's here for your information to give you an indication of a history. Now, those numbers per ward, I can tell you looking at my own ward, must go back 25 years, at least, because when I first came into my ward, we had £900,000. In here, it's indicated it's 3 times that amount that came into my ward. So obviously time had passed when all those monies went in. We can't go through it. The other thing that might seem an anomaly, I think Councillor McCormack sent around an email asking a question, which we can't go into tonight, obviously, because we don't have the information, is that when you get S106 for some of the recreational and community facilities, they don't go to your ward. There's an offset, they're placed elsewhere. It's an offsite is the expression in planning, and it goes elsewhere in the borough, but it is a community resource. Some of you might remember Razor's Farm that was taken out of our hands as far as planning was concerned, but the inspector, and this is a classic example, was looking at the contributions from the developer for open space and community sports facilities, and it was the inspector who dictated that Razor's Farm, which is just on the edge of my ward and Bramley, was going to be in Downgrange. Now, I'm sorry, that's the kind of, I've got to use the word incompatibility to what is intended for S106 to give local people access to those local facilities. Nonetheless, individual councillors, please have a look at that spreadsheet. They are reconciled figures, but you will have to approach the S106 officers yourselves, because obviously I don't carry that information in my head. One caution there, and that's going for all the councillors across the board, but as the committee, just to think about, we've got all out elections next year, and all the boundary changes except 2 will be changing. So there's another exercise that will have to be completed in the next year or so to reconcile the old ward boundary changes, the contributions that went into there, and the new ward boundaries, and to reconcile those particular issues. This point, I'd like to leave the spreadsheet and move on to probably the more important part this evening, is the flow chart, which I say pictures tell us 1,000 words, but this is an easier way to understand the process. Now, what I've brought this along to you tonight for is, I know you only got this at the end of last week, so the idea is to give you a chance to go through it and see if there are any questions. Now, I'm going to highlight something on the first page that we do mention SIL in there. Now, there's another wider activity ongoing in the borough at the moment, and it's the head of planning, sustainability and infrastructure, Ruth Olmela. She is coordinating an S106 SIL strategic document. Hopefully we're going to have a document that sort of brings that all together. She's doing this across the council for those that provide some of the services in the S106 monies, but also with finance. And there are two officers in planning that are coordinating this, Mark Lambert, who we all know, and Lisa in one of the assistant planning managers. She's also involved, and she's the one that's coordinating with finance as far as scrutiny is concerned. Now, I'll quite happily take any questions on the flow chart. Individual questions on the spreadsheet, please go to the S106 officers. And the objective here is to try and get a guidance paper out for all members of the council before the end of this year. I would like to get a draft of that before this committee, the scrutiny committee, at its next meeting early in the new year. So there's the objective. I intend to convene the task and finish group again to flesh out that draft paper. So thank you very much, Chair. That's about as much as I'm going to say, and I'll invite any of the members to put in some suggestions, comments, whatever on the flow chart.
Okay, I've got Sue to speak first. I've got Kim and Andy afterwards, and Councillor George. So Sue, if you'd like to come in first.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Miller, for sharing this. I'm assuming that this was done some time ago, this flowchart. I think the second part of the flowchart actually needs updating. It was changed as part of the capital strategy back in February. So I'll endeavour to make sure that's actually updated in terms of how the funds are actually released and added to the capital programme. But obviously the first page of the document, as far as I'm aware, is unchanged until, as you say, Ruth has completed her piece of work that she's doing in terms of looking at the section 106.
Thank you for that. Obviously, I didn't produce this, but this has been in the mix for some little time. I was only sent this so-called updated flowchart last week. So yes, if it has to go back for amendment, thank you. We'll get the officers to do that.
Okay. Councillor McCormack, they did send an email out to a question you emailed earlier, but if you'd like to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was in receipt of the email, and it's very insightful. The fact that the amounts there are going back over 25 years suggests is a good answer to the question I had on Brighton Hill, then Brighton Hill North and South, which didn't appear till 2002. I've got a couple of questions on the flow chart. I mean, what makes sense to me is we've got a vertical flow of information and we've got a horizontal flow of information. So things are going down the chart in chronological order, in sequential order. But what gets a little bit confusing is some of the left to right stuff, which appears to be information inputs and outputs. And then at some point it starts going right to left again. Now, some of these I imagine are iterative processes. I mean, engaging with ward members and portfolio holders, for instance. But my initial thought was I can identify two stages in a planning application that probably need teasing out in terms of milestones for, there's probably more than that in terms of milestones for section 106. So the first one is pre-application, where you get a lot of discussions with a developer prior to submitting. And then there's the section 106 agreement completed, which appears to be around about the same time as the planning permission being issued. I think if this is going in front of full council, it'd be very informative to have a couple of milestones put on there just to flag up the significance of those events. And also I'm struggling to see where the heads of terms agreement comes in as opposed to the agreement completed, because in my mind I had that heads of terms would happen before completion of the section 106. And the other question that I had is more in terms of, this is a process that I can see being followed at the start of a planning application. But what happens if you've got Section 106 money that hasn't been spent, and in some cases the clock may be ticking on that being spent, and how is that reflected in the diagram?
Right, first thing, yeah, okay. The planning application received, the one thing that the first page shows, and what came out of one of the reasons we set up the group in the first place, the task and finish group in the first place, was that members weren't involved early enough. It was a given. And that's really the sideways one there. Certainly that initial ward members, that's an orange box on the left of the first page there. It was the scopers were going off doing their own thing without any consultation to the ward members and or parish councils, because we're a lot closer to the local communities than the scopers. I'm afraid I've got to be very frank about that. Now, heads of terms are agreed way before S106 is agreed. We have planning applications where the 106 has not been finalized, has not been signed off. So the heads of terms have already been, if you like, drafted out long before it gets to the planning application. Because if that doesn't come over, you've seen the block statements in a planning application, the ones that come to committee, for instance. And it says if the S106 is not completed, is not agreed, then the planning manager is authorized to refuse the application, because that's the one hurdle it's got to go through. Now, heads of terms aren't mentioned specifically, but heads of terms are part of the development of an S106 agreement. So what I've just said, I think it goes hand in hand. You've got to have the heads of terms drawn up. If you think it's valid for the ward members to be aware of the heads of terms to be put in that flow diagram, I'm quite happy to have it included, but I don't think it brings anything to our table, quite frankly, because it's the process that's being gone through. Yes, you made the point of what is there already. I don't know what you I don't know what you did when you were here in the council the first time, Andy, but I know I have spent almost all my time in my ward trying to find out how much is in the pot, what's it's allocated to, and trying to move the projects on. It's taken me over 10 years to get there, but that is an individual thing that you will have to speak to the finance people about, and that's another part. That's a separate, I think, to this. This is the development to the S106, but what you're doing is that's what's here now and today. What is in your ward? What's the pot in that ward, and what can you get that spent on? And that's where I found, I'd like to say for it, all of my fellow ward councillors that I've been with in the last 13 years, we've worked together to try and get that money spent, because you're right, there's a trigger, and that's that 3 stages that we've gone through about the rules of how we get that 106 money of value into the community. It's looking at those dates, because if you don't spend it by certain dates under some of the criteria, it goes back to the developer, which is the last thing any of us want to see. So it might be, I think that's probably a straightforward one to produce, and we can produce that as if you like, a 3rd page, very simply, to give members an idea of who they approach in the council. And that's been the other black hole, is exactly who we speak to. But Sue, I know, would like to add to that.
Yeah, Sue would like to come in now.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Thank you, Chair. So the piece of work that Ruth's doing is a specific request from the Council's Capital Board as part of updating our capital programme and capital strategy, is to make sure that actually how are we picking up and ensuring that we're making appropriate use of Section 106 monies. So I think, as Councillor Miller described, there's almost two elements of this. One is the initial engagement in the first place, in terms of what is it that you actually want in your ward, and how does the Section 106 link to that. Then there is, in terms of making sure that that then actually articulates through into a scheme that goes into the programme. But obviously there is a piece of legacy work that has to be undertaken to make sure that we are fully utilising the funding that we have and that absolutely don't return it. I don't know whether anyone can hear me because it's all frozen.
Yep. You're coming through loud and clear.
Oh, that's okay. You just all stop moving. So yeah, so there are those pieces of work are going on, and obviously that will fully involve the ward members in terms of how do we now articulate those into appropriate schemes.
Okay.
And just to prove the point, if I could, Chair, thank you, is exactly what Sue said. I've just completed a round robin on projects within Chinham, and we've managed to spend about £180,000 of that S1/S6 money. Okay, we went through the process, we signed it off, and it's all going forward. But it took a lot of cajoling, dare I use that word, to actually make it happen.
Okay, Councillor McCormack, have you got any supplementary questions?
No, thank you, Chair. I think that's a pretty comprehensive set of answers.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. We've got Taylor, George and Potter. So, Councillor Taylor, if you'd like to ask your questions now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Miller, for doing this. And I think one of the things, more of an observation, really, that I have on this, it ties into what you were saying about how difficult it is to get information, and what Councillor Cormack was saying. And from a new councillor perspective, this is something you need to be briefed on very soon after you have been elected. As a sort of anecdote, I mean, one of the things as a new councillor is you get a little pep talk by the chief executive who says, would you like me to walk around your ward with you? And I said, well, actually, I'd like you to walk around the offices with me so that they can explain to me what's going on in my ward and what's available for my ward. And it was made sort of fairly clear to me that wasn't an option. That's not how things worked. It was foolish me, but I think that actually it is really important to know that, you come in, particularly as a new councillor, and especially if you're not doing planning as a speciality, you haven't got a clue about any of this. You have absolutely no idea what funding opportunities are available for your ward. You certainly don't even, haven't got a clue what people are talking about when they start talking about section 106 and SIL. So it does, but it potentially can have massive impact for your ward. It could do that, and particularly for wards like myself and Councillor McCormick, which are sort of areas that are getting on a bit now. They don't have an opportunity for any further new development, so we've got to use the money that's there if we can and wisely, and yet we know nothing about it or how we intervene in the process. So I think a little induction pack, the flowchart's fine, but it needs words to go with it for a new person or for somebody that's not involved in planning, and with some sort of clear direction of, well, this is what's here, this is the kind of thing it can be spent on, and how do I as a councillor maybe get involved? How do I say, well, actually, if there's a pot of money for that, we could have an outdoor gym in this part of my ward, and it would be really beneficial for people. Can I do something about that? How do I feed into that? Who do I ask? What are my options? And the flowchart probably means an awful lot to people who know something about the planning, but it doesn't mean very much to me, although I really like flowcharts, I've got to say. So I think for me, as a person outside the planning area, I tend to sort of do on other committees, I need some words to go with this, and I specifically need like an induction pack, as it were, as a new councillor, for sure. Sorry, it was just an observation.
Okay, Sue wants to talk first, and then if Paul would answer afterwards. So if you'd like to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Taylor, thank you very much for that feedback, because one of the things that we have been discussing generally is, because of the all-out elections and therefore potentially new wards, etc., there's a whole raft of information that we've been collating. So, for example, the resident survey results, we have them by the new wards. So the intention is absolutely to try and produce a pack for each new ward member, or for their ward, for the 3 members per ward, in terms of factual information. So I'm more than happy to take that suggestion away and have that added in some way with some obviously resulting from the task and finish group and obviously the Ruth piece of work as well, how that might be incorporated into that pack.
Councillor.
Yeah, and I thank you, Sue, for that. And that's exactly what I was going to respond to you, Kim, was that that's one of the products that I want to get out of before the end of this year. And that would go into the new packs that come out after the all-out elections in May. But yes, absolutely essential. You talk about the words, that's what the task and finish group is. That's what I was alluding to earlier on. There'll be a draft that we'll get through, then we'll roll our sleeves up around the table, because it was a very, very productive meetings that we had. And we'll get down and make sure that we cover all these aspects.
Okay, Councillor Taylor, have you got any further questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And if you do, when you finish doing your draft, want somebody who knows absolutely nothing about it to give you some feedback about whether or not it's understandable by somebody who knows nothing about it, you know, don't hesitate to ask.
You'll be the test subject.
Okay, thank you. Councillor George, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Paul. It's been a good presentation, very good. Look, I think I'm very, very pleased to see this additional, it was necessary, and it's been very good, the additional consultations through the entire process. That's very, very welcome. And also, if I may give some feedback, we've been recently having, possibly for Sue Curtin, I know there's been some recent changes in the process already of how we dish out Section 106 monies, and very recently it's worked extremely well, and you know, we've been able to resolve some of the backlog issues out at Winchurch here, so it's been very good. So I'll give her that positive feedback if I may. On a pedantic point though, but it's something I've learned today and I hadn't recognised, is to what extent the Section 106 agreements can actually be formulated during the pre-app stage, and I didn't realise and recognise that. And I suppose looking at this flow chart, I can see how it works very well for an application when the information is very much in the public domain. The one issue I have got is normally, and I may have this wrong, but normally pre-apps are considered to be commercial in confidence, and therefore if we try and use this as a flow chart for the pre-apps, you know, if we go out on the left-hand side, is members encouraged to consult with parish town council, may not necessarily be appropriate for a pre-app situation where, you know, going discussing it with members of the town council may not be appropriate. So can I just ask for comments on that and thoughts on that, please, Paul?
Yes, certainly. If you see the planning application received formal pre-app, if one is received, some developments don't ask for pre-apps. It's not mandatory. We have found in this council that pre-apps are very valuable because it's a two-way street. It gives feedback from essentially ward members and other members that want to come along to the pre-apps. It gives feedback to the developer or applicant, because sometimes it's an applicant and not, they haven't got to the getting a developer on board yet. But also it sets the scene. Ward members can come into a pre-app informally, it's behind closed doors, but as you say, it's not in the public domain. And informal discussions can go on at that particular stage. So ward members can get involved in a pre-app before you hit the flow chart. It's not, as I said, it's not mandatory. Now, the engagement, let's put it this way. If you're aware, and I'm talking about the royal we here, about members who are aware that there might be developers coming in, good time now, because we've got a Sheila out there. Now, if you think your ward's going to be impacted by a potential site, now's the time to engage with either your community or your parish councils to see what projects there are. Don't wait until it's coming down the pipe. But once the process starts, that's where you're prepared at that orange block in there to actually provide your feed into the S106 process. It doesn't get signed off, and very rarely does it get signed off before the planning application is determined. And we know how long that process is. So there's plenty of time to get engaged. And we tried to get the ward members engaged as early as possible in that process.
Councillor George, got any supplementary questions?
Well, not really, but I suppose it's just the point that if we're looking at flow as a pre-app, I'm just wondering whether we should be going out to parish and town councils at that stage or not. I think that probably needs to be limited if it's at the pre-app stage rather than at a full application. I can see it's absolutely valid, but at the pre-app stage, we probably shouldn't be consulting with or in any detailed way with parish and town councils. That was my only point there.
I think I come back to the observations made by Councillor Taylor. The words have got to go with this, and the words have to go through this flowchart. And those are exactly the kind of inputs that the Task and Finish group will welcome to make it absolutely crystal clear about who gets involved when. The flowchart is what it is, but then you give the detail in between.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Potter, I'll put you down next. I'd like to ask questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, not necessarily a question, if I may, but if I can just make an observation or two. And I mean, firstly, just to say thank you to Councillor Miller and the other members of the Task and Finish group and the officers, including Sadie, really. I mean, I remember the history of this, and going back 18 months or a bit longer, really. And despite the enthusiasm shown at full council, it wasn't the easiest of groups to get off the ground, despite a lot of councillors saying they wanted to know a lot more about 106 agreements and be involved. But and one thing I am pleased about genuinely, I think, is the within the information Councillor Miller has given us, the involvement of ward members with scopers and others to actually have a worthwhile discussion about exactly where potential 106 money may be spent. But there's a lot of there can be a lot of misunderstanding about the status of 106 agreements, really, if you look at planning law anyway, really, and sort of automatic obligations that some of us have of ward members aren't always the case, really. But the example that Councillor Miller quoted, I think, Razor Farm, where it seems somewhat perverse, really, to suddenly be presented with something which was spending 106 money some distance away from the originating source of that potential benefit to the community. And that sort of thing, I think, could well have been avoided had there been a much earlier discussion between the various parties, including the ward members. I'm absolutely sure that ward members there would have said, hang on a minute, I mean, if you're really looking for a home for some of the money that may accrue from this development, it isn't at Down Grange. And it's that sort of thing that I think involved ward members can actually secure if they're encouraged and have the confidence really to take part in these discussions at an early stage. Bearing in mind the developer is part of the partnership in regard to the 106 agreement anyway, and they have their own views about what might flow from the development they're providing within the community. But I mean, this is a big improvement, really. And I mean, as everybody is saying, I think it's been used, the dark art of 106 agreements in the past has been a mystery to many of us. This will help a great deal, and I think really once all of us as local councillors have a much better understanding of exactly what might flow from it, and we're on the ball, and we're taken into the confidence of those that actually have a finger on this, really, that will bear dividends for us all, I think, really. And I say I'm very grateful for the Task and Finish group for the work they've done on this, really, and they've moved it on pretty well in the last 12 months. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks. Is there any comment you'd like to make to that, Councillor Miller, before?
No.
Okay.
No, thank you, David.
Okay, thank you very much. Has anybody else got any other questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much a question, but yeah, going back a few years, we had a development in Sherfield, and I was very upset when I found that £17,000 of 106 money was allocated to park benches, which we didn't need. And 17,000 is a ridiculous amount of money to spend on park benches anyway. And the village hall, which did need a huge amount of money spending, when it got nothing. And I started to do a bit of digging with Venetia Rowland, and we were actually told by one of the scopers, "Oh, we never talk to borough councillors. It's nothing to do with them." I actually couldn't believe somebody said that to me. So I absolutely welcome more engagement at the early stage with borough councillors. But on the subject of 106 agreements, I found something else out last week. There's a couple of people on this committee will remember DC, and we voted through a development with no on-site affordable housing, and but with an off-site affordable housing contribution. I found out shortly after that meeting, within the 106 agreement, you can actually dictate where that money is spent, which makes a huge difference to how you feel. It certainly makes a huge difference to how I feel about off-site contributions. You can actually dictate that it shall be spent on a borough-wide scheme. You can dictate that it will be spent within the ward or within the parish, or you can dictate that it will be spent within a certain mileage of the parish. And I think it's things like that in 106 agreements. And going back to the Hounds and Fields planning application years ago, we dictated that they shall put the traveller provision in, because you can dictate the use of any parcel of land. 106 isn't just about the money. There's all sorts of other things you can do with 106 agreements, which can be very, very useful to all of us. Just an observation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you to Councillor Robinson. I'll tuck that one in the back here, and we'll make sure that's mentioned in the preamble.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions or statements they'd like to make? Councillor Potter.
Well, just to make the obvious riposte in respect of Councillor Robinson, I mean, it seems to me it's always better if you can get the affordable housing on site, really, and that's always the aim and objective we should have, consistent with council policy. I've said it at the DC, and I'll repeat it ad nauseum. So, I mean, that's my position on that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Miller, for that. Very helpful. Before I move on to the next paper, does anybody wish a comfort break for 5 minutes? No one seems to want one. So I will ask Councillor Golding if she would like to come in and present her revised budget paper.
Thank you very much, Chair. The report before members this evening provides an update to the Council's medium-term financial strategy and outlines the revenue budget proposals for 2021-22. And the capital programme will also follow this in February next year. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to have a significant impact on the Council's finances, as we aim to ensure that residents are well supported, alongside seeing a reduction in our income and the need for us to support economic recovery in the future. Therefore, it has been a very challenging time to set a budget for the upcoming financial year, not least because we've had to find over 3 times the usual level of savings. We have also had to make more significant changes than have been required in recent years, which is why members' input this evening and the ongoing consultation is so vital. Cabinet have embraced the new council plan as our focus point in order to make sure that spending is prioritised against what matters to our residents. While I appreciate that members will want to focus on budget proposals and changes to the service this evening, I think it's also worth remembering that these budget proposals include protecting the funding we use to support rough sleepers and those who require support to find housing, as well as the commitment to increase community safety patrol officers in order to support residents to feel safe in their local neighbourhoods, among many other services we're protecting. We will also maintain our position as a low tax council. Our proposed average rise of just £5 is still likely to be the lowest in Hampshire, and we're able to keep the burden on council taxpayers low because we ensure we make our other money work hard. And indeed, council tax makes up a fairly small part of the council's annual income. We do also continue to have a generous council tax support scheme, as well as offering extra support over and above that during the pandemic. And we're able to do this in part because we have received a significant proportion of our annual income from returns on our investments. And so far, the returns from our property investment strategy are holding up. And our strong financial management means that we are in the position to weather the storm of COVID-19. But we have also had to face the reality of the impact it will have on the council's finances, not just in this year, but projected across the whole of the MTFS period. And that's why there are challenging proposals put forward this year for consultation. Every effort has been made to protect and maintain services that residents tell us they value. And while fees and charges will go up by 3% as usual in order to cover inflation and rising costs, this is in line with other councils and local providers. And we always strive to make it a fair way of balancing between those who decide to use additional support services and everyone having to pay. Members will note that this year the budget proposals do contain an impact on staffing. While the number of staff impacted didn't technically meet the threshold for full staff consultation, we have chosen to take this route this year to ensure that our staff can engage with the proposed changes and have a genuine voice in their feedback. Members will also observe that most unusually for this council, the report does present a residual budget gap. This is related to the government's delayed spending review, which is expected tomorrow now, and the local government finance settlement, which will be some weeks after that. And therefore, the gap is expected to reduce in time, and a fully balanced budget will be put forward to the council in February 2021. So in summary, because I suspect you have a lot of questions for me, please do remember this evening that these are proposals, they're not fixed decisions. And therefore members' views this evening and residents' views throughout the consultation are vital as we work towards final budget proposals for next year. As I said, I'm sure you will have questions for me. Councillor Rattigan, leader of the council, is also here should you have questions for him, and Sue Curden will be supporting us both this evening. But please rest assured that it's not just about questions, we are also in listening mode for your comments on these proposals. Many thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Two quick things. One, we've got a public speaker, Neil Duncan Jordan, I'd like to bring in now. Another thing, I'd like to remind members, these are political decisions. So therefore, any political question will go to the councillors for answering. The officers are here to answer any technical questions that members may wish to have. So just to make sure you're aware of that. So Neil, if you'd like to make your presentation now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Just for a bit of background, my name's Neil Duncan Jordan. I'm the regional organiser for Unison. Unison is the union that represents the staff at Basingstoke Council, and we've been interested in the proposals that have come forward. We're aware that there are 19 staff affected by your budgetary considerations, and when the formal consultation process starts, which it hasn't done yet, we will of course take part in that fully. We're aware of the reductions in grass cutting and the review of the waste team, but tonight I just want to focus, because I've only got 2 minutes, on the mobile attendant and the sports facilities. And I just want to draw that out tonight, if that's okay. Firstly, I want to focus on the role of the attendant that you currently have. The attendant's there to allow access to emergency services when they need it, such as ambulances, particularly when there have been, on many occasions, I understand, broken legs by the participants, the need to open height barriers and drop bollards. That's one of their key functions. Their second is to act as a visual deterrent against the misuse and vandalism of the facilities, and also to guard against antisocial behaviour. They have the numbers of the CPSOs who can be notified if problems arise. And the third practical role that they play is that they're there to issue out council-owned equipment, flags and nets, for example, for people playing football. These will no doubt be abused if they're not kept an eye on. Now, from a practical point of view, the idea that you can have a mobile attendant does raise some problems for us. Firstly, a number of the games kick off at the same time, and the mobile attendant has to be at that point, at that time. It seems difficult that they can be in 2-3 places at once. That's the first point. The second point is that the attendant has to often deal with multiple issues. If more than one issue arises, the mobile attendant may be somewhere else rather than being present at the place where the issue has arisen. And finally, a lot of the facilities that you have adjoin community centres, meaning that teams that are playing and opportunist thieves, in fact, could potentially have access to these centres, increasing the potential for theft and vandalism if there aren't security personnel or attendants in place. There have also been issues about double bookings, needing people on site to sort those out, which we think could be a problem. And also a problem about contacting the mobile attendant, because if the mobile attendant changes from week to week, many of the teams that play at the moment already have the numbers of the attendants that are there on a regular basis and know how to get in touch with them. We think that will change if you have a mobile arrangement. So we're concerned about this proposal. We'll be putting in formal responses when the consultation kicks off properly, along with our concerns about some of the other measures. But that was the main one that I wanted to draw to the councillors' consideration this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Stick around for a moment. I don't know if the council, Golding or Rattigan wants to answer, or if anyone's got further questions for Neil. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Neil. It reminds me I was supposed to be having a phone conversation with you, but we didn't get round to it before this meeting. So in your assessment, are you saying that the sports attendants are probably one of the most critical roles that we should be saving amongst the ones that might be at risk?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would say that there shouldn't be any at risk, and we would want to talk to you about mitigating against any redundancies. But in terms of the impracticalities of what's being proposed, reducing from 6 attendants down to 1, we think that really does need serious consideration for the reasons that I've tried to outline.
Okay,
thank you.
Councillor Rattigan, would you like to comment now?
Thank you, Neil. And I know that we take your union's views seriously. I mean, we will work this through. We will make sure that people have the information that they're required to contact the mobile attendant. And I'm sure that over a period of time, like all things that change, people will adapt and find a way of working. Now, obviously, this is the consultation. We will make sure that we listen. I think most of the councillors on this meeting tonight know that I'm fairly approachable, and certainly many of your staff come to me to ask for questions and put forward suggestions that go forward. So I think we are a listening administration, and we will continue to be so throughout this consultation.
Anybody else got questions for Neil? Councillor Golding.
I just wanted to offer some reassurance, really. Obviously, we do have a recorded booking system, so the football pitches are used, particularly at weekends when it's busy, by known groups, regular bookings. So we will know at any given time who is responsible for care of equipment and things like that. Obviously, we will have a closer look at this. I will take this back to the portfolio holder, but not every instance is going to require on-site assistance. I think we can expect local groups to take responsibility and not expect antisocial behaviour. Yeah, but we will take that back to the portfolio holder.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got questions for Neil? Okay, thank you very much for coming along, Neil. I hope that gave you some answers. Okay, now, has anybody got any questions for the rest of the paper for Councillor Golding and Councillor Rattigan? Councillor McCormack, Councillor Mackay, Potter.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got some political questions and some technical questions. I won't wax lyrical about the political questions because this paper appears to be nearly identical to the one that went before Cabinet last week. But I do have to say I'm questioning why we're looking at cuts in terms of the or spending charge increases in terms of the disabled parking provision, because I do think that's that's quite a mean proposal, and I would want to flag that up as part of the comments in this meeting. And I would like to ask a question: why have disabled people been singled out for this treatment? It seems to act as a disincentive to them accessing facilities such as the retail in the town centre. I also have some question marks in terms of with things like increases with parking charges. Is that really the right thing when retail's taken such a huge battering recently in the light of the COVID epidemic, and the fact that certain trends such as online shopping have accelerated as a result of the pandemic and people being at home. The other thing is the increase in charges for things like collection of waste, replacements of bins. We've had huge problems with that this year. Residents need some reassurance, and the last thing they want is increased charges, and also especially the pest control charges, because the people that are likely to want to use those are the people that can least afford to pay. And the technical question I have is, we have set a small budget gap, a unique set of circumstances in anticipation of some news from government. Rishi Sunak has been in the media recently. Have we got any further indications from government that there's more money forthcoming?
Right. I'll let Sue answer the technical bit first.
So obviously, hopefully tomorrow we'll have more information from the spending review. That tends to give us an indication of what we're likely to get in the provisional finance settlement, which we were hoping to have probably by the 2nd or 3rd week of December. So around that, the indications are that we will hopefully hear something about new homes bonus. One of the things that one of the key themes that they said they'd be looking at as part of the spending review is potential ongoing support for COVID in the new in the next financial year. So and obviously I'm sure all of you have probably heard some of the things that have been floated in recent days in terms of what might actually be included, including a potential pay freeze. So tomorrow we will get some further indications. We, from that, generally can take an assumption around, I say, the settlement, and then obviously, as Councillor Golding has already mentioned, we will then have to take on board all of that information and look at how we close the residual budget gap for 21-22.
Okay, Councillor Rattigan and then Councillor Golding to answer.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the fact that we could support the BVA, and I was very moved by Carol's presentation earlier on, which I think well emphasised how we as a community can come together, is only possible because we have sound finances. I'm looking at the list of some of the organisations we supported: CAB, the Fellowship Foundation, Sycamore Halls, Carnival Halls, the Community Furniture Project, Age Concern. I'm delighted to say that our good financial management, and to be honest, the group leaders who are on this meeting and Gavin have accepted that we are in difficult times, and although they won't be judged by our budget, it is fair that they are feeding in and we are accepting some of the things that they're saying. Now, as I said to them, and I say to all of you on committee, that we will listen to things, and things that are unpalatable for our residents, I am sure that we will find ways to manoeuvre around them if at all possible. But we can't make promises at the start of this consultation, but I guarantee you we will listen and we will make the right decisions before you see the budget fully in February. Thank you.
Councillor Goldie.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to car parking, I think disabled car parking absolutely is one of the most challenging proposals we've put forward. Interestingly, we didn't particularly do that in order to save the most money. We did it in order to help disabled people access the car parking spaces and prevent misuse of them. So that's something that I'm very interested in consultation and feedback from. That's feedback we had prior to making the decision, that the consultation is going to be really key on where we go with that. Obviously, it does present some cost benefits as well, but I think making the right decision on that one's going to be more important. So I look forward to feedback, and indeed have already had some, you won't be surprised to know. In terms of town centre car parking, we are still really committed to driving footfall in our town centre. That's why there's no extra charges for town centre car parking proposed, other than the 3% increase, which merely just covers our rising costs. But no extra changes are proposed this year. In terms of some of the other things that Councillor McCormick has mentioned, it really is about trying to make sure that we are spreading the cost around people who are choosing to use additional services. So things like waste charges, they are equalising the charges across Hart, which does better reflect the costs that are involved in there. But I think very importantly, the main thing we're going to continue doing differently to Hart is to protect green bins and glass bins, because we're really prioritising our recycling rates. We don't want to disincentivise by charging for those bins. That doesn't seem logical with other priorities that the council has. So that's quite an important proposal for members to be aware of.
Okay, before I ask if Andy's got a supplemental, as someone that drives some of the blue badge around, my concern is if we charge, is you're allowed to park on a W line. All you're going to do is cause parking issues elsewhere in the borough. If you want to stop abuse, if you go anywhere else, there's a 3-hour limit on how long you're allowed to use your card badge for, and in there you get a time clock. In this borough, you don't have to set it because you will never get penalised for that. Some work around that may be worth doing, because that's where the abuse is going on. People could park all day, and that's taking a parking space, rather than just the 3 hours to do their shopping and move on and let someone else use the space. So yes, there are some aspects of the blue badge that could be looked at, but I'd be concerned if you charge, because as I say, I'd just parking on a W line somewhere, which is what you're allowed to do. But yes, the 3-hour limit, we were to start with the parking attendants knowing how to look at that card, because I actually got a parking ticket in Milton Keynes for not using that card properly. Here we don't enforce it. So yes, there are things, but I'd be reluctant to charge. But that's a personal one. If someone uses a blue badge to drive my mum about, and I only ever use it if my mum's in the car. I actually got stopped by a gentleman that does the enforcement on Churchill Way, and had quite a chat with him. It was quite interesting, the legislation, when you're allowed to use it, when you're not. So yeah, I think there is some work around it, but I'd be very reluctant to charge for it. But
thank you. That's really helpful feedback, actually. We'll definitely take that on board. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Cormack, did you have any supplementaries on your?
Just a couple, really. It's interesting you pointed out Milton Keynes. I was on a Zoom call with the leader of Milton Keynes Council last week, and they've taken a big hit in their parking revenue. If any of you have ever been to Milton Keynes, their parking arrangements in the town centre are confusing, to say the least, with lots of different coloured zones and coloured lines. But that's beside the point. I'd like to ask the portfolio holder, what evidence is there that people are abusing disabled bays, and that charging disabled people will prevent other people from abusing it? Because the realistic expectation of most non-disabled users is if they park in a disabled bay, they'll get a penalty notice anyway. So I'm not convinced at all by that one. I'm not convinced either with the attempt for things like pest charges to redistribute costs to people who are almost like being presented as niche users or awkward users. These people, when they want to use these facilities, are going to be in really dire need of them. I don't think it's right that as a council we should be saying, if you've got a problem with verbing, that you have to, pay 50 quid or whatever to do that, whereas you didn't have to pay it previously if you were of limited means of income, and you're having to make choices of getting pest control out or putting food on the table. I really don't think that's a choice we should be imposing on our residents. And also in terms of the incentive to recycle, well, we know our recycle rate is pretty dire, but I don't think not charging for green bins is proving to be much of an incentive for recycling. But I have had a great many number of complaints, and I know that more than half of the 250 formal complaints that residents have lodged with the council this year have been about collection, especially when we regressed back to a reduced set of services for quite a long period between March and August of this year, where we had alternate weekly collections and a number of residents that had overflowing bins and they just weren't listened to. The impression I get this time is that we need to listen to residents, and we haven't done a particularly good job of listening to their concerns on things like waste collection and services this year.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. I will take that as a vote of confidence for keeping weekly collections in there, amongst your other comments. Disabled parking is a tricky one, which is why, as I said, ears are open on this one. We've had the theory behind it is that obviously if you get free parking with a blue badge, then there is an incentive to use the badge, as the chair said, under circumstances where you're not allowed to. However, if there's no cost benefit to doing that, then that should leave more spaces available for people who need them when they need to use their blue badge. So that would be the thinking behind that one. However, there are lots of other aspects to that decision to which we will be listening to in the consultation.
Okay, I've got Councillor Mackay, Potter, Taylor and George on my list. So Councillor Mackay would like to ask, and Ashfield.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a points to raise. The first one really is the green agenda. In the report, it says that climate change implications are likely to be positive. I just wanted to highlight the need to follow that up with the information that is promised in the document, so that we don't lose sight of that longer term, very important issue. Because at the moment, I can only pick out a couple of things that concern me. The shuttle buses to go. And at some point in the future, there's to be a park and ride system. There's a sort of disconnect there, at least in time, between contributions to the green performance of the council. The issue of garden waste, I just wanted to raise and ask that you look at considering that as recycling, protecting it in the way that you've tried to do with some of the recycling things. I think we'll encourage bonfires. If we make it too expensive for people to partake, we're going to end up with bonfires. That's very negative from an environmental point of view. So I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the climate change implications and do get the further information promised. The other one, I'm not really going to say anything new to what's been said already, because there are a few things that just struck me as mean-spirited in amongst it. The pest control charge for people already on means-tested benefits. Removing parking permits from residents over 75 to save £2,000 a year. And the third example I give is the disabled badges one, where I think the equalities impact assessment that's attached to the document really tells you why you shouldn't be doing it. And if misuse needs to be tackled, let's tackle the misuse and not penalise people who really do need those disabled badges. Thank you.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you. I feel like lots of those were more comments than questions for me, but if there's anything specific you'd like an answer on now, please could you say?
They are comments really just to feed into the thought process. I did submit some questions to the chair before the meeting. They're more technical in their nature because they're parts of the proposal that I didn't understand. I don't know whether we're going to cover those in this meeting or whether I can expect a written response. Maybe the chair could advise.
Yeah, I did see them. that would be. I'll have to find the email and I'll forward it on to Sue.
No, they have.
I've seen the email. If you're happy with the written response to that, then I can organise that with the relevant portfolio holders for you, Councillor Mackay. That's fine.
Yeah, it was clearly from my understanding, perhaps a lack of experience being a relatively new council. I didn't understand how some matters could actually be savings, and wanted to understand that.
That's fine, thank you. And thank you for your comments as well. I'll take those on board too.
Okay, next I've got Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. And I mean, I won't add very much really, because I mean the other councillors have said a great deal about some of the detailed points really. I mean, I do endorse what Councillor Mackay has just said really about, dare I say it, some of the mean-spirited elements of the proposals that I see being put forward, which to be frank, I think are unnecessary in a council like this one, who has this reputation for really very good financial management and, quite frankly, reserves which are second to none when it comes to local authority budgets throughout the country, really. I mean, I know Councillor Golding said, you know, we're intent, perhaps quite rightly, in terms of legislation of presenting a fully balanced budget in February 2021. Well, good luck with that, really. But if some of these proposals are the best you can do in that regard, I think there's going to be a lot of critical comment about them, really. And I am going to say it, really, in regard to the removal of free parking for disabled badge holders. I mean, the thesis there just doesn't seem logical. I mean, it entirely, as Councillor Mackay said, if there is abuse of an arrangement, deal with that abuse, but do not take that facility away from disabled badge holders. That really is very mean-spirited. I think will attract the sort of headline you don't want, or the council doesn't want, and there are others like it, really. I mean, we will work with you if you come forward with some reasonable, sensible proposals, but I don't think some of these go under that heading, quite frankly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's fair for the consultation to run its course and for us to listen. We don't have to take all of the proposals forward in February, but I think to make changes at this stage is probably too soon. But I am definitely getting a very strong message that members of this committee are not happy about the disabled parking, and therefore I will pass that on as strongly as I can back to Cabinet.
Councillor Potter, have you got any supplementary questions?
I beg your pardon, I've muted it, but no, thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I already raised in the Cabinet the issue of the rural car parking. I mean, I spoke to our business association in Ovan and they just think they're bonkers. I mean, we're doing our best to try and boost trade in district centres, well, and in the town. And this is just going to push them back. A lot of these shops sort of are on the edge anyway in rural areas. All it'll do is push more traffic onto the main road, the roads where there are no parking restrictions. So we'll end up with sort of empty car parks with people fighting for the spaces outside the shops. And in a lot of cases, those are the staff who work in the shop. So making it more difficult for the customers to get in there. So it has all sorts of knock-on effects. It's just, you know, just completely crazy. But the other one is the grass cutting, the parish grass cutting grant. These grants came about as part of the double taxation panel, which I was on when I first joined the council in 2002, chaired by John Leake, the much missed John Leake, who chaired that for many years. I chaired it in the last year after he became leader of the council and they took control of the council. And we eventually got this pushed through because the parishes were getting rather fed up with the fact that they were having to provide facilities in the rural areas, in the town areas were being paid for out of the council tax. And this was seen as a fairer way of doing this. And in my own ward, the only piece of grass that we get a parish grant for cutting in Overton is for a park owned by the borough council. So you know exactly what's going to happen. If they got any sense, the parish council will say, well, you can have your park back, you can manage it, you can cut the grass, and you can cut all the hedges as well. And this will end up costing you even more money. This is just completely bizarre. I mean, in most cases, you're just, you know, this isn't something we're going to stop doing this and save money. We're pushing the cost onto parish councils. So we're just taking money from another, or the council, as they see it, is taking the money from another pocket of the residents there, and they're already, a lot of the parish precepts now are heading up to the sort of getting half of, or more than half of, the borough precept, because of all the additional charges they're having to take on because the borough don't do these things or the county don't do them anymore. This would just make that situation even worse. This isn't sort of us, we'll save money, but we're just going to pass the cost on to them. And again, and what makes it worse is the biggest problem with the parish councils in this borough is most of them are unelected. So the people who live in these parishes don't even have the opportunity to do anything about it. At least with the borough elections, there are some, well, apart from last year, but or this year as it was with the recent ones, but we haven't had a parish election in Overton since 2013 because they never get enough people to stand. And who's going to want to stand to deal with stuff like this when all you're doing is transferring the costs? I remember we had a meeting with a representative from Hampshire County Council. Can you remember this? Because he was there, where he came up with this idea of parish councils being an as yet untapped source of income, I think was his phrase, And unfortunately, I thought, well, we expect that from the county council, but no, we see the borough doing exactly the same. It's just a trickle down effect. But what's trickling down onto us is something we can do without. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Councillor Radical willing to answer, so I'll let him go first, and I'll go to Councillor Golding. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. As always, it's always good to reminisce of 2002. My point is that parish councils know what they need to spend in their own area and are particularly good at doing so. I know my own parish council in Kingsclere, set a precept, they work to it and do a lot for the money, and they get the buy-in of their residents. I hope that will continue throughout all of the parishes that this borough has, and I am sure that they get questioned, as we will get questioned on what they raise and how they spend it. But to remind you that I think our council tax accounts only for 17% of the money that we raise, and it is by the good financial management of the rest of the borough, and fees and charges, our property portfolio, that we are able to spend so much on our residents, and that our spend per head is exceptional as it stands.
Okay, Councillor Golding, if you'd like to answer as well, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to reassure Councillor Tilbury that there's not an attempt to pass on extra cost to the parish council. We're proposing a generic change in grass cutting, and therefore a proportionate change in the grass cutting grant to parishes, so that services can be equalised unless parish councils actively choose to top them up. So it is fair and proportional, and shouldn't be a second tax on residents, because that's not what we're trying to achieve here. As for rural car parking, I appreciate why it may not be popular. However, I think it's right that we consider it. We shouldn't be expecting just town residents necessarily to pay for car parking. However, I do understand that small town centre shops like Overton, Whitchurch and Tadley do have different needs. So if your economic group, sorry, I forgot their name, but if they do have alternatives that they want to bring to us, then absolutely do come. I'm quite happy to listen or feed it in through the consultation, and we can consider different things that they think would work, while improving parking standards in the villages and towns.
Any supplementary question, Councillor Tilbury?
Yeah, just sorry. Oh, yeah, well, just to say, I mean, if you look at the proposal for the grass cutting, is to cut the grant. So someone's got to pay for the grass cut. And if you're not going to pay for it, the parishes are going to pay for it. You know, the person who cuts the grass for the parish council, which isn't the borough council, it used to be Test Valley at one point in Overton because they were cheaper than the borough, but they have to get a private contractor in. He's not going to take a 10% cut, is he? So, you know, that you're cutting the funding that the parish received to pay for that, so they're going to have to make up the difference. That's how numbers work, Hannah. It's...
Or they can choose to cut less frequently.
Okay, I'm gonna with that I'm gonna move on to my next speaker, which is Councillor Kim Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sort of two bits really. One is probably more for Sue, and then obviously some comments on some of the political choices being made. I mean, they're a bit interlinked really, but in Appendix 1, where we have the table with the amounts, we do have some zero columns, and I understand from Sue that's because the amounts are quite small. But I think it would still be really useful for the purpose of considering how we will respond ourselves as councillors in the consultation to actually know what the amounts are and whether it's an income gain or it's a saving. And partly because when I look at some of those and look at them, you know, free residence parking for the over 75s and the sort of bowling and allotments, without that information, it kind of feels like a sort of change of policy by default being slipped into a sort of budget situation. So I think the amounts, even if they're very small, are useful to have because it gives us an idea of the impact when we're thinking about on how best to respond to the consultation. So I think that would be really helpful if that's possible, Sue. And then the other bit for you really is around the equality impact statements in Appendix 2, I think it is. And for me to be able to make an effective response, they are not sufficient. They contain no quantitative information at all where it is perfectly possible to put some. So if we have been able to make a financial estimate of how much sort of income we're going to get from disabled parking, we ought to have been able to have identified how many people we think we're going to be impacting or how many disabled journeys we're going to be impacting, for example. If we're going to be putting, you know, charges for the 75 plus on their parking permits, we ought to have an idea of how many people are going to be impacted by that, because otherwise you can't possibly have done the estimate. If we're going to cancel the shuttle bus, and I note that, you know, what the impact assessment does say is that we are really expecting the brunt of that impact to be taken by older people on disabled and older persons concessionary passes, then we ought to be able to identify exactly how many people are going to be impacted by that through the usage statistics, and so they should be included, and they ought to be the pre-COVID ones. And similarly, you know, with waste charges, how many people are going to be impacted, and particularly I think in terms of the pest control and now charging people who are on benefits for these services, how many people is that going to affect? We must know that from our historic data. And I think also some sort of indication of trend or mass by geographical location, because is this important if it's a very few people? It might be more important to me if I found that, you know, all the area, we will be creating slum areas by doing this, because, and you know, I appreciate the wrinkled brow there, Ken, but you know, we have some very much older and areas of deprivation in Basingstoke, and those areas tend to have people on very restricted wages. And I mean, I know from talking to residents about the increases during the pandemic of the problems with pest control, and if we find that our current users of this service who are on reduced incomes and benefit would normally get a concession are in, you know, concentrated in certain geographic areas, you know, we're not actually making nice environments for people to live in. So we need to know, are we likely to be doing that? Is that a potential impact? And therefore these things can, you know, these aren't political things. This is just information that ought, as far as I'm concerned, to be in an impact assessment. If we're making an impact assessment, we should be able to have some quantitative information in it to get a sense of scale. because it's really difficult for me to make a judgment about, well, you know, am I feeling really, you know, in favour or not in favour of this as a political decision without that baseline information. So it's hard to do that. So that's one for Sue. Obviously, I've got some issues about some of the things that people have mentioned on the political aspects. You know, and I'm sure the pest control, for the reasons I've just hinted at, is one thing, you know, charging the most vulnerable. And I think it's really ironic that we're thinking about things like the disabled parking and the shuttle bus, who are impacting some of our most vulnerable people in society. You know, yesterday on the Audit Accounts Committee, I was there looking at the statement of accounts for the year ending 31st March 2020. And on page 2, Councillor Golding, you're telling me, you know, how alongside the front services that matter most to residents, we will provide additional support for vulnerable people, including disabled people. Well, we're going to do exactly the opposite here with some of these cuts. And they do impact people, and we could be creating problems, which is why we need some of the information to make that kind of assessment. But I'm particularly unhappy about pest control, you know, introducing any charges for people who are currently on benefits. The current benefit structure is really very unfair and poor, and is actually under the current minimum wage. So think about that very carefully before you do it, and the impact that it has on our environments. The disabled parking and the shuttle bus, I think, are bad moves, because you know, climate control with the shuttle bus, and again, you know, if disabled people who are on a restricted income cannot afford to park, and they might try and use a bus, it's not going to be there. So I think, you know, we're giving these people a double whammy, as it were. And I was speaking to a disabled friend of mine about how they would feel about this parking, and there's no evidence that there's actually any abuse at all. And you know, is that a problem? You know, and most disabled people are on a restricted income. And essentially what this person said to me is, well, you're just, you know, I need those car parking spaces to be able to do things like go to the doctors, go and do my shopping, go, you know, just to be normal, to be treated like other people. And if we prevent that when they're on a restricted income, we're really, you know, this person said to me, it's lockdown every day for me. So think about that on the political front.
Okay, Sue, would like to come in first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think that's a really useful insight in terms of the additional information that you would like. I will certainly take that away and speak to officers and see what additional information we can supply.
Councillor Golding, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you. I mean, on the political side of things, I think you didn't have quite so many specific questions, but I can reassure you that I'm listening. Your feedback is quite helpful, and we will take that on board when we're making final decisions. Obviously, with the shuttle bus, there are alternative routes available, so that's not leaving people without an option, because there is an option. But I definitely take on board your comments on pest control and disabled parking, as they are echoing strongly the rest of the committee as well.
Councillor Raskin would like to go. I just want to make a quick comment around the blue badges. I am aware of some abuse, but the abuse is not what people think. For instance, a number of people have said to me, if I'm going to the pharmacy to pick my mum's prescription up, I can park in the disabled bay. No, I can only park in the disabled bay if the disabled person is in the vehicle. So yes, there is abuse. Even an MP didn't realise that. So I think there is some education around when you're allowed to use the blue badge or not. You can't just use it to pop the shops for your mum. It's there for because the disabled person tends to have the door wide open. So a normal bay is not wide enough. So that's when you need the wider bay in the disabled bay. So yes, there is some, I know of abuse going out there, but I think it's more a matter of education around the fact if the disabled person is not in the car, you cannot use the card. And that is as simple as it is. As long as you're in the car, you're then allowed to use a disabled bay. Okay, into that. If Councillor Rattigan would like to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. And very quickly, Kim, I think you know that I wouldn't want more slums or any area to be deprived, and it is the hope that through our partnership with housing associations we can improve areas that are not as well to do as some others, and that we can improve the build environment there and make them better for the residents, so there is more pride in an area. I mean, I speak to people who came here in the 60s. A sense of pride was for when they moved to the estates, and I would like to see that back again. It will take all of us on council to make sure that that pride comes back into the borough and to the communities within it. I sincerely hope that we do not build slums, and certainly don't let any areas slump into that's thoughts. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Taylor, you got any supplementary?
No, I mean, thank you really, Sue, for agreeing to sort of take that back and see if there's extra information, because I think it's really useful to help us decide what kind of things that as councillors we would like to put forward and to consult on. And you know, whilst I appreciate with the shuttle bus other services are available, including taxis even, they're not necessarily at the same time. The shuttle, you know, the concession shuttle isn't necessarily available at the same time as the commercial runs. And if you have a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, or you need to go somewhere, and the commercial one doesn't happen to be running at that particular time, then you know, you're a bit limited, particularly if you're a disabled or older person. So I'd just like you to take that into account.
Is there anything you'd like to comment about, Councillor Golding?
No, but thank you. I'll note that.
Okay, I've got Councillor George, Asfield and Carruthers still on my list. If anybody else still wants to speak, if they can indicate, I'll phone you. Okay, Councillor George, if you'd like to ask your questions.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you. I think, as Councillor Golding said in his introduction, I think the council has been extremely successful in its sort of investment strategies in terms of generating income for the council to deliver our services. Has been excellent. The one item, however, that's I suppose not seen on the list is, you know, the actually decline in the purchasing power of our cash reserves, and you know that actually, if you look at it in terms of decline of working hours, is dwarfs some of these other savings here in lots of ways. I'm just wondering, you know, I fully understand the real need for having to have a balanced portfolio, to have liquid assets for reserve purposes and all that, and to be fiscally responsible. But we also, as a council, have some very ambitious plans in lots of ways on terms of the views of the council, where we should be in a few years' time, and also, you know, the green economy booming. I'm just wondering, you know, is there any opportunities that Councillor Rattigan would like to bring, or Councillor Golding would like to suggest, where we can perhaps work this money a little bit more? You know, I noticed there's going to be a review of the reserves, which is welcome, because I think we could possibly release a little bit more money that's not necessarily being necessary to go into, you know, to be liquid. I'm just wondering, are there really any opportunities out there for us to work the money harder and to try and get a better return on that?
Okay, I'll ask Councillor Rattigan to answer first.
Thank you, Councillor George. I just want to reiterate, when I first came on to council, it was possible to get treasury management returns well in excess of 5%. That is not available now, and therefore our options as far as that is concerned are fairly limited. Obviously, we review our investment strategy constantly, both in terms of our income coming in and the possibilities for disposals should those come along. But it has always been the policy of this administration and many other administrations over the years that we have decent reserves, because, as I've already alluded to, with only 17% of our income coming from council tax, we need to ensure that there is a continuity of income, because there needs to be a continuity of spending, as we work through our MTFS and have ambitious plans for the future. It is hoped that our investments in places like Manydown, that will deliver some windfall and income to us in the future years. But our job as the administration is to try and get through these lean years and make it to the sunshine of the horizon that is before us. I urge you to stick with the tough decisions that we are making over the next few years. It will be tough, but I do see a brighter future for us financially, and I hope that we will all be around to enjoy that.
Councillor Golding, would you like to add to that?
Actually, I'd quite like Sue Curden to comment on some of the more technical nature of Councillor George's question first.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the reserves, obviously in February of this year, when we set the current year's budget, we did a full review of reserves, and obviously the bulk of our revenue reserves is completely linked to a risk assessment. Fortunately for us, we did do that. We can't possibly have thought that COVID would be the risk that we were trying to manage, but what it has done is a number of the financial implications that have come through from COVID. So, for example, any loss of property rental income, any issues around business rates, we hold the reserves for those purposes. So if we look at the current financial year, obviously we still have a gap in the current year. Our current accounting policies say at the end of the year, if we have a deficit, we will take it from the appropriate risk reserve. If we use the reserves, obviously we have to then replenish them, because obviously they are risk assessed each year. And if you were asking me in my risk assessments this year, I might be slightly jaded by the fact that we've got this, substantial financial impact from COVID and the ongoing recession. So my recommendation wouldn't be that we should be utilising the reserves that are set up for risk associated purposes. In terms of making our money kind of work harder, I think obviously Councillor Ratkin's obviously talked about the treasury management side of things, and obviously we're looking at the property investment strategy. So we're already looking at actions around that and how that might generate additional income. That's already assumed in terms of our update of the MTFS and therefore the resulting budget gap. So, so we've already taken a lot of that into consideration in terms of what we think the opportunities might be. What I would say though is that there is likely to be some proposals in the capital programme update that will allow us to make some of that funding work a bit harder and generate us an additional investment return that is not linked to property investment. So all of those things are being considered, but in terms of the starting point of the budget gap, it already picks up all the things that we think we can do.
Okay, Councillor Golding, would you like to comment now?
I actually think they've both said everything, other than we do obviously take our responsibilities very seriously to make sure we are working money as hard as possible. And it is still working. I think returns are lower than we'd want. But the fact that council tax forms such a small part of our income does show that our money is still working for us.
Councillor George, have you got supplementary questions?
No, thank you. I think it's very reassuring that we're getting that balance right, but it's just worth asking the question because it's quite a significant number if you look at it on the balance. If you were to look at it on the balance sheet, the decline in the purchasing capital is quite a significant number. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashfield, I've got you next. Have you got a statement or question you wish to ask?
First of all, just in comment really on the rural car parking charges and comparing rural car parks with those in the town, I think is unreasonable. If you're living in the town, you're probably only a mile away from your nearest Aldi, Lidl, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, and most of the sort of car journeys used for the rural car parks are going to be for convenience shopping. The raising of 30 grand of revenues across a number of car parks to me just doesn't feel worth the effort, and we've already talked about the parking, they're moving off car parks and onto the road. I would also be interested to know the methodology around that 30 grand revenue expectation, but that can follow. I'm not looking for an answer on that now. But the other thing I was going to mention was the increase in fees on bulky household waste. If you go onto the Basingstoke and Deane website today to book a bulky waste collection, you're going to be waiting 2 months for that service. So it suggests that in the absence of getting your bulky waste collected for 2 months, you're perhaps going to be more inclined to flight it, use a bonfire, or pay another commercial enterprise to pick up your bulky waste. And so perhaps there is another way of looking at that by investing in that service, a service that residents obviously use and are happy to pay for. We might actually find ourselves with an opportunity to raise revenues from that way. So that was just a suggestion. Thanks.
So you want to come in there?
I'm happy to come in on that one. So I do accept that rural parking is different in terms of rural town centres. However, we do still have the challenge where they do need to be maintained, and charging for those can help us fund the maintenance. Otherwise, they can get into disrepair, and then they're not very useful for parking anyway. It's helpful to comment on your bulky waste collection. I've been waiting 2 months. Mine's going to come tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to it.
Have you got any supplementary questions, Councillor Ashfield?
I think just without sort of labouring the point on the rural car parking, most of those trips are really short. People are just popping in for a loaf of bread. And unless the enforcement's there, the revenue isn't going to follow, because people will just take their chance. And that's my gut feeling. And that's really why I'm keen to understand where that 30 grand estimate has come from in terms of how much revenue it's going to raise across 4 different wards, which suggests that Whitchurch might just generate 10 grand a year in car parking, for instance. That's all, thanks.
Councillor Raskin, you'd like to come in at this point?
Thank you, Councillor. I accept that it may seem disingenuous to pick up small amounts of money, but this is really about a fundamental change for many in the small local communities, that they don't drive the half a mile to the shop, that they walk or they cycle. And if they're discouraged by a small parking fee for a 2 or 3 minute journey to the shops in Kingsclere, I don't think that is a particularly difficult thing. And there, I've been in Whitchurch recently, so I know that people are happy to walk, and they find the car parks already full if you go to the silk mill and places. So I think it is a behavioural change that may be a financial disincentive too. So I think it would be good to try it out. And obviously these car parks need to be maintained, and then the money that we generate will hopefully go back into an improvement in them and improvement in the spaces that are made available.
Councillor Gold, you've got anything to add? Okay. Have you finished, Councillor Ashfield? Okay, thank you. Councillor Carruthers, I've got you next on my list. So got any questions or statements?
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief question, really. I recognise why we're looking to charge for disabled parking, to better prioritise and optimise the use of the spaces, and I understand that. But just from a practical point of view, are our car parks set up to enable disabled users to use things like the payment machines? Because obviously if we've got wheelchair users and we're now asking them to pay, and they've got to get access to these machines, are we set up for that? Is it straightforward for them?
Councillor Golding.
Yeah, thank you. So that is being considered actively at the moment, but the expectation is that because the machines were put in, that if they're not fully accessible now, it would only take small adjustments in order to make those accessible.
Any supplementary questions, Councillor Carruthers?
No, we just wanted to find out if that was being considered.
Good quick. Some machines might be a bit hard for a wheelchair user. Councillor Faulkner.
Right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is one of, can we do something about the presentation of this document if it's going out for consultation? If we take sections 10, 11 and 12, it's basically several pages of cuts and increased charges. And my parish of St Maryborn will be particularly hard hit by quite a number of them. Now, there's a lot of work obviously gone into this to justify the cuts, etc., etc. But they all appear under headings, and I read them, of protecting and enhancing the environment, strengthening communities, and fit for the future. I just think sections 10, 11 and 12 read rather badly, because the cuts may all be justified, but not under those headings, because I can't see how all those cuts can possibly be strengthening the communities. Thank you.
Councillor Golding.
So consultation is already underway. We have put quite a lot of effort into trying to make the consultation as accessible as possible and as understandable as possible. So we're not expecting people to read through this entire document. We've got videos to summarise some of the changes, as well as kind of short excerpts. So I appreciate your parish council may wish to read through it. And obviously, if they have any questions for me, then I'd be happy to answer them.
Councillor Faulkner, have you got any supplementary questions?
No, thanks, Chair.
Okay, that's the end of my list. Has anybody else got any questions or statements they wish to make? Okay, thank you, Councillor Golding, Councillor Rattigan, coming along and presenting those papers. Been very informative, and and to Sue for all her input as well. So we're down to the last. Normally, I'd ask for comfort paper. We've only got one paper left, which is the work programme. So I'd like just to get that out of the way rather than breaking. So in January, we've got the overview of major projects, and the 106 is still ongoing. Is anything people want to add? Sadie, is there anything particular we need to do with this paper, or is it just for noting?
It's just for noting, Chair.
Is that noted by members? Okay, thank you very much. I'll declare that at the end of the meeting.